Ohio State gives up 21 points to Rutgers. The Scarlet Knights probably not capable of scoring 21 points in an inter-squad game. So I think we need to go 30 minutes of just serious breakdown analysis of the Rutgers game. We got Pat Murphy on the line to do just that. No, we're leaving Rutgers alone. Score didn't matter. They did what they needed to do. I think we all know better than that. Penn State's front and center, of course, Pat. And this is the game of the year in the Big Ten, and it was expected to be just that.
Absolutely. This game, could determine the Big Ten East. If Ohio State wins, it will. If Penn State wins, it should, assuming Penn State goes and handles its business next week. So, yeah, I mean, you're playing for kind of all the marbles here. There was a little bit of shine, I guess you could say, taken off this game a couple weeks ago when Penn State lost at Minnesota. But, Penn State wins this game and can then go on and win the Big Ten title. I think they're right back in position to potentially be in the college football playoff. Ohio State, obviously being undefeated, is in pole position there. They would have to beat Penn State this week and likely beat Michigan next week, and then would go on and win the Big Ten. Even if they lose to Michigan next week, you could potentially see them squeezing in, depending on how that game goes. But this game that we're focusing on today is as big as any we've seen this year across college football. 2 top 10 teams. I expect Penn State to stay in the top 10. I think they were number 9 in the college football playoff rankings that come out tonight. So it'll be a big clash in Columbus. They're expecting, a huge crowd. 3 major pregame shows will be on hand at Ohio State's campus with ESPN's College Game Day, Fox's Big Noon Kickoff, and the Big Ten Tailgate Show, all doing their shows from right outside the Horseshoe. So, with a lot of the SEC and the ACC kind of taking this week to play lesser opponents, this is the major marquee game around college football this week. So I imagine all eyes will be on that. It's been interesting. There was a lot of talk today at interviews with the players and coaches about the last 2 years. The games between these two teams, a combined win total for Ohio State by 5 points. They've all come down to the end of the game. Ohio State actually drove late in both of them to win the game. JT Barrett completing the comeback 39-38 2 years ago, and then Dwayne Haskins connecting with Benjamin Victor on a crazy kind of play, and then KJ Hill taking the screen pass to the house at Beaver Stadium last year. So it's been a very close series. Penn State obviously has gotten its fair share of wins within the recent years. They've probably been the most competitive team to Ohio State over the last 7-8 years since Urban Meyer came in. Michigan State's probably in that category too, but of recent time it's been Penn State. And I don't know if this is a full-on rivalry at this point, but it's certainly a competitive game, and I expect it to be a fun one Saturday afternoon in Columbus.
Pat, before we continue with the Penn State look, reviewing the first 10 games of the season, certainly Ohio State was viewed by many as the best team in the Big Ten, or that maybe Michigan had taken over, and it would be interesting to see with the quarterback change and with the coaching change whether Ohio State could continue to be the dominant team in the conference. So there was never any question about roster depth, personnel, elite talent on the roster. But because of losing arguably the best coach in the history of college football and an NFL caliber quarterback, and because of the issues last year on defense, certainly the power indexes and the metrics people were putting together had predicted Michigan to be the favorite. And then maybe somebody like Nebraska or Wisconsin would emerge from the West. And there were all sorts of theories about Ohio State's possible demise. Again, relatively speaking, that they weren't going to be a top 4 team, a college football playoff type team, that there were certain power rankings that had them 11th, 12th, 13th in the offseason. And then they come in with this kind of performance through 10 games. And certainly nobody should be shocked that they're undefeated. They have this much talent on the roster, but considering all those question marks, everything is pretty much unfolded almost perfectly this season. They have almost maxed out. I don't want to say maxed out their potential, but they have played up to their potential.
Absolutely. And it goes to show what preseason talk and preseason rankings and whatnot, which we all are a part of, what those mean. Ohio State, as you mentioned, was not as highly thought of as in previous years, with Ryan Day taking over and the defense struggling last year, Dwayne Haskins going to the NFL, and people not exactly sure what Justin Fields would bring to this offense. And all they've done is go out and handle business each and every week, as we've talked about before on here. They haven't lost a game or they haven't won a game by less than 24 points. Their averaging margin of victory is a little over 40, which is historically good. The defense has, gone from being in the bottom half of the country to number 1 in the country. The offense is up there at, I believe, number 4 in total offense. So it's been a perfect year for Ohio State thus far. I mean, people were upset last week that Rutgers scored 21 points against Ohio State, and Ohio State still won by 5 touchdowns. So the standard has remained very high under Ryan Day. There's no question about that. And the message, I guess, that's been preached is you've got to finish the job. It doesn't matter what Ohio State's done through these first 10 games if they don't go out and close the deal these last 2 weeks. The previous 2 weeks were kind of cupcake games. They were expected to win. It was kind of battling complacency. Now it's about battling a team, as Ryan Day said today, with equal talent in Penn State and Michigan these next 2 weeks, and then likely again in the Big Ten title the following weekend. So this is going to be the major test for Ohio State. Can they finish the job? As I said, can the Buckeyes, reach a 3rd straight Big Ten title and go from there into potential college football playoff?
And when you mentioned the schedule breakdown, and you've probably thought of this as well, I think the Big Ten could do Ohio State a few more favors in regards to spreading out the difficult games, because let's face it, when they're making out that schedule, they project in their minds how good these teams are. And Ohio State's the dominant team in the conference. Are they going to be playing in a Big Ten championship game most years? Absolutely. So when you schedule Penn State, and obviously Michigan's going to be the last game, you were basically telling them, we're going to give you a soft schedule until the final 3, and then you're going to have to play maybe the 3 best opponents of the season the final 3 weekends.
Yeah, it's been a strange one, because oftentimes Penn State, Ohio State have met late September, early October. Those have been night games a lot of the times because of that. It's strange that this game comes the week before Michigan. You've seen it before with Ohio State's schedule. They played Michigan State, I believe it was 2015, the week before. You just never know. These schedules are supposed to be generated by computers and whatnot. So yes, it certainly makes it complicated for Ohio State. It also gives Ohio State an opportunity here at the end of the season to impress the committee. I mean, not that they haven't already, being the number 2 team in the country as we're doing this, but you've got 2 definite ranked games here to close out the regular season, and probably a 3rd in the Big Ten championship game. So if you do the math there, that would add up to 5 ranked teams, assuming Cincinnati and Wisconsin continue to be ranked. That's as many as LSU, can reach for the year. So if you're talking about potentially that number 1 overall seed in the college football playoff, that's still in front of you, very much so. If you're Ohio State, you just got to take care of business, and that's easier said than done for sure. But as Ryan Day said today, they don't worry about the schedule. They just play the games. They knew before the schedule was coming out, they would have to play Penn State. They would have to play Michigan at some point in the year. The fact that they're back-to-back doesn't seem to upset him too much, if at all. So we'll see how it goes. Ohio State has had the advantage, you could say, of resting some guys these last couple weeks. 2 weeks ago against Maryland, the starters were out by halftime. They were out. They didn't start the 3rd quarter. And then last week against Rutgers, most of the starters were out very early in the 3rd quarter. J.K. Dobbins specifically was out at halftime. So, it's been a lot of guys standing on the sidelines. Ohio State also held out a number of players dealing with some minor injuries. Ryan Day even said today that they probably were a little overly cautious with some of those guys against Rutgers. So this should be a fairly healthy, a fairly fresh Ohio State team going to these final 2 games, which, you could say, playing devil's advocate, is the advantage of how the schedule's worked out.
Christmas is coming, folks. Of course, shop at Amazon using the link in the description section below, so you have the same shopping experience, don't have to spend an extra penny, and you help us build the channel. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports to break down Ohio State's huge matchup with Penn State. I was talking to a Penn State guy from SB Nation today, and it hit me during the conversation. Obviously, Ohio State Michigan is historically the game in the conference. It is, of course, the game, but the most important game in the conference historically. Then there was about a 5-year span where it was Ohio State, Michigan State.
Yep.
And since 2016, it's been Ohio State and Penn State. Penn State wins the head-to-head in shocking fashion in 2016. And even though the Buckeyes get selected for the playoff, it's Penn State who wins the head-to-head and wins the Big Ten. Then the last 2 years, Ohio State makes its way to the Big Ten championship game off the heels of beating Penn State by 1 point and by 1 point. And otherwise, Penn State would have been in the Big Ten championship game as a heavy favorite. So this has become, as you mentioned, I don't know if it's a rivalry for no other reason than Ohio State's the best team in the conference. And Michigan and Wisconsin have maybe taken their shots, but consistently since 2016, you would have to say overall, Penn State's been the second best program in the conference.
I agree. And I think, as you mentioned, that's played out on the field. I think you can see that in the way that these two teams talk about each other. There's a lot of respect there, but there's also, I don't want to say hatred because I don't like that word when we're coming to sports, but, these teams want to beat each other, and it's very clear. And like you said, every year there's been a lot on the line in these games, whereas that hasn't always been the case with Ohio State and Michigan since Urban Meyer took over, and even before that. So you can go back quite a ways since Penn State joined the Big Ten and looked at some of these matchups. I remember specifically when Terrell Pryor was a freshman. And, he was a Pennsylvania kid, and they came to Columbus, and he tried to push for extra yards, didn't get it, and got stopped on 4th down. And that was a big win for Penn State then, especially given the prior connection, and they were recruiting him. So you can go on back to, I think it was 93 when Penn State first played in the Big Ten, to a number of games that has been interesting between these two teams. And I expect Saturday to be another one. Penn State has one of the country's best rush defenses. Ohio State has one of the best running backs in the country in J.K. Dobbins, who has rarely played into the fourth quarter. How will he handle a top defense like that? He was able to move the ball. Ohio State on the ground was able to move the ball against Michigan State, another top rush defense earlier this year. But, Penn State seems to be a little bit stiffer test. They've proven it for over a longer stretch. So that'll be a big question. Ohio State's passing attack against Penn State's cornerbacks that we talked about this last week got exposed against Minnesota and haven't been a strength all year. So, Justin Fields threw for his first 300-yard game last week. Can he eclipse that, going over 305 yards this week? There's a lot of interesting matchups in this one. Penn State, with James Franklin saying last year after the game that Penn State wasn't elite, and this would be another chance for them to try and prove that they are elite. So just running through some storylines here, but a lot on the line for both teams, and that's what we've come to expect in this matchup.
Yeah, it's the barrier for Penn State, and as you allude to James Franklin's comments after the 27-26 loss in Happy Valley he just kind of pointed that way and said, they're elite.
Yeah,
we've been great. We went to a Rose Bowl. We won a Big Ten championship. They went to another, what would be BCS game, New Year's Six game the next year, the whole deal. They've been right there, but that's been the team that's kept them out. And they're elite, and until we beat them, we can't call ourselves elite, and that has been the case. The Minnesota issues on defense in terms of the passing defense for Penn State were extended by Peyton Ramsey and Indiana last week with 371 yards through the air on 31 of 41. And that's with one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, Stevie Scott, being held in check for 54 yards by the Penn State defense that you mentioned is one of the best rushing defenses in the country. So it will be interesting in that Michigan State for a year and a half was the best rush defense in the country, and the Buckeyes ran right through them for about 300 yards. And then Wisconsin came in with the top 2 or 3 rush defense, and Ohio State displayed their prowess again. They can do this to Penn State because my question to you, Pat, was going to be with Ohio State hitting on all cylinders and Penn State being certainly a formidable opponent, but showing some areas of concern the last 2 weeks. Do you see anywhere where Penn State would have an advantage?
It could be in that rush defense. I think, as you mentioned, Ohio State has passed all the tests, but I think this is the best rush defense they've faced. I certainly think Ohio State will be able to move the ball through the air, because of the cornerbacks being ineffective. But and you look at the other side of the ball too. Ohio State hasn't faced a true mobile quarterback like Sean Clifford, at least someone with the talent of Sean Clifford this year. How do they handle him? I believe he's still the Big Ten leading passer as well in terms of yards. Now he's thrown almost the most interceptions in the conference, and Ohio State has been pretty opportunistic when it comes to turning the ball over. But if they are able to move the ball through the air, if they're able to move the ball with Sean Clifford leading the way, if they can score, in the high 20s, 30s, something like that, that could be enough to try and keep up with Ohio State. I don't expect this to be an overly low scoring game. It'll certainly be a test for both sides' defenses. Ohio State's defense, while, as I mentioned, ranked in the top of the country and, showing very few, if any, cracks, they haven't faced an elite offense yet this season. Wisconsin had Jonathan Taylor. Now they were able to shut him down, but there wasn't a ton to that passing attack. Michigan State didn't have an elite pass attack. Maybe the best offense they've faced is Indiana, who they faced very early in the season and did well against. And Indiana's obviously evolved since then. So that's where I'm going to be looking as far as my biggest question mark is how does Ohio State's defense handle the mobile dual threat, I guess I should say, ability of Sean Clifford and then this Penn State offense.
Talking to Ohio State football, we got Pat Murphy on the line. I encourage you to jump over onto 247 Sports Bucknuts and the work that Pat and others do right there, talking to Ohio State football with the Buckeyes looking at a Big Ten Eastern Division championship bid with Penn State in town. People forget Justin Fields committed originally to Penn State, made his way to Georgia, and then, of course, to Ohio State, and certain connections and relationships built there as it looked like he was going to head north to play for Penn State. Before we let you go, Pat, want to get your angle on just anything that you heard in your various interviews today with the Buckeyes and from Ryan Day at the podium that kind of caught your ear in setting up this matchup and just the status of the football team right now.
Yeah, a couple of things, and you just hit on one with Justin Fields being a former Penn State commit. He didn't really we asked him about that after the Rutgers game the other night, and he didn't want to talk about it then too much. Today, he was a little bit more forthcoming, talking about how hard it was to decommit. He really didn't want to make the phone call to James Franklin telling him he was decommitting, but just felt like it was not the right situation for him. He didn't feel as connected to that class. He'd started to blow up as a national recruit and was getting the looks from a place like Georgia, which was obviously closer to home. So, that was an interesting storyline to come from today. I think also the Chase Young story. He'll be back this week. Jeff Hafley, one of the co-defensive coordinators, said, he's excited. The defense is excited to have him back. He's excited, and asked about him being overly amped for this game. Jeff Hafley said, I hope he's overly amped. I hope he goes out on that first snap and gets off the line quicker than usual because he's so excited to be back out there. He's like, because that's still really fast. So I think that'll be interesting to see. James Franklin made the comment today that, poor little Penn, he's coming back against poor old Penn State, which I thought was interesting. So, getting him back, obviously Ohio State did just fine defensively without Chase Young in there. The slew of defensive ends that they can throw at you, the Buckeyes that is, stepped up. And I think they had 8 or 9 sacks between these last two games. So bringing in a guy like Chase Young will bring back a guy like Chase Young, I guess I should say, will only be a boost for a game like this when the competition ramps up. But yeah, those were the two major talking points I took away from today: skill level, coaching, things like that. And that's not to take anything away from Wisconsin or Michigan State, but we've kind of seen those two teams exposed a little bit. Maybe they weren't as highly thought of as when they came. Nebraska wasn't the team anyone thought it would be when Ohio State went there. So this should definitely be the test. And then obviously next week going up to Ann Arbor, you never know what you're going to get out of a rivalry game like that.
Vegas finally found a point spread that was too much for Ohio State to reach, or under the circumstances, they just didn't reach it, let's say, at 52 points against Rutgers. But Ohio State, a 18-point favorite at home. This goes to show you Penn State's a top 10 football team. And this is not a reflection on Penn State. This is a reflection on Ohio State and how dominant they've been. But, man, 18 points, Pat.
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I figured this would be a two-score spread just because of how Ohio State's been viewed by those in Las Vegas and the odds makers. But I was surprised it went all the way up to 18 and a half, depending on where you look. But, as you mentioned, they've only not covered the spread, I think, twice this year. And, this defense has been good enough to keep teams from scoring. The offense is moving the ball almost at will. I guess when you break it down like that and you look at some of the issues we talked about with Penn State, that 18 and a half makes some sense. I haven't picked the score yet. I still want to look a little bit more at Penn State, but yeah, I imagine being somewhere right around that spread.
All right, Pat, we appreciate you stopping by. As always, join Pat Murphy at Bucknuts 247 Sports. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.